It's time again for Fromm and Fuller. Al Fromm, former political advisor to President Bill Clinton, and Craig Fuller, former political advisor to both President Ronald Reagan and George H.W. Bush. Good afternoon, fellows. Al, I'm going to start with you. And today, The Spy ran an interview with Michael Sanderman, who's the executive director of the Maryland Association of Counties. And to be honest, he paints a pretty bleak picture for both local and state governments if they don't get some relief in the next new year. Do you see that happening, or do you think the Republicans are going to go back to being fiscal conservatives?
Well, first of all, aid to state and local governments is a really important issue, especially during economic downturns. But it's not a new issue or even unique really to this pandemic-induced recession. It's hard to believe, but almost a half century ago in 1973, 1974 recession, I was head of the subcommittee who had jurisdiction over this issue, so I have a good sense of the politics of it. I thought Michael Sanderman did a pretty good job of explaining the issue, but very simply it's this. During a recession, revenues for state and local governments go down, demands for services go up, so they build up a deficit, but they can't run a deficit legally, so what they have to do is basically cut payroll. And that means cops and teachers and firemen and healthcare workers in this case, and trash collectors. And obviously they don't like to do that, so they want to look to the federal government to get assistance. The Congress, it's a little different now because of the partisanship, but basically Congress never been particularly eager to give unrestricted aid to state and local governments. Congressmen like to fund projects that they can point to and get credit for, and giving piles of cash to state and local leaders to do what they want with isn't exactly very satisfying to them, so they tend to resist it. And that happens in both parties, I might add. But in spite of that, I think we'll probably get some aid this year or this next year, probably early in the year for state and local governments. And the experience we had now almost a half century ago is instructive. In those days, we didn't have cable TV or Twitter for all the local officials to make their case. So we held a hearing on the impact of the recession on mayors and county officials. A bunch of them came in and they convinced my boss, who was Senator Ed Muskie of Maine, and then Senator Bill Brock of Tennessee, who lives in Annapolis, that we really needed to do something to help them. And so we proposed a very innovative bill called countercyclical revenue sharing. But the idea was to give state and local aid during the recession based on need. Well, the opposition was very quick and stiff to that. We couldn't even get a hearing in the House, so we had to go to an innovative approach. The House passed a bill that was their anti-recession bill that was a big public works bill. Today we call it infrastructure, but it was just a big public works bill with lots of projects that they could claim credit for. And so what we did is we attached, as an amendment, we attached state and local aid in the Senate to the House passed bill. With the help of the House leadership, we got the House to accept that. And that eventually got rammed through the House over the objection of the committee leadership in the House. President Ford actually vetoed it twice, and we finally overrode. But Craig, I think, has talked a lot about the possibility of a bipartisan infrastructure bill, and I think that's a big Biden priority. It'd probably be something the Republicans will go along with. And maybe our path is not it makes some sense again, which is to tie your state and local aid to infrastructure, make it all part of an anti-recession package, and maybe we can get it through. I think that probably is the best way to do it.
Craig, do you share Al's optimism?
I share some of the optimism. I kind of reflected also, time was way back when that members of Congress often came from holding local and state elected office. and then they matriculated to Washington, D.C. And I suspect if we took a look, an awful lot of members now come out of congressional staff. They have a different kind of experience. There was also a time when Republicans, it was pretty much part of our platform was that the government that is closest to the people governs best. The trouble is that so many members kind of lost sight of that. And Al is exactly right. When they get the chance to pass major bills and go home and take credit for things, it seems a whole lot better than have a mayor or a governor or a councilman or a county supervisor taking credit for it. And yet, those local officials are the very ones that really understand, I think, how best to use these funds. So I've always been enthusiastic about what they call them block grants or less restricted money, because I think it goes to officials who have been elected to meet the needs of the people, and they're closer to the people. So I would hope that in this new era we're going to enter, that we have a little bit more of that philosophy being applied, so that money does flow to these local governments. I thought Michael's interview was excellent, by the way. I thought he made a number of important points. One of them was, of course, that not all local situations are the same. Not all state governments are the same. They receive money in different ways. And so there is no one single off-the-shelf kind of federal solution that's going to meet the needs of the 50 states and the thousands of cities and counties. So again, I think a lot of it has to be local. I hope, and Al referred to it, I hope that a good deal of money flows into an infrastructure program, because it puts money where it's needed, it creates jobs, it stimulates local economies. And I don't know that it meets some of the needs that Michael was talking about in his interview with you, but I do think that that's one of the ways that Washington has been able to do a better job than just trying to manage or manipulate social needs from their perspective on Capitol Hill.
Craig, I'd like to stay with you. President Trump has now pardoned another 15 people, including Republican allies, a 2016 campaign official with the Russia probe, the former government contractors who were convicted of a Baghdad 2007 massacre. Should the pardon powers of the presidency be taken away or modified given this track record?
The presidential power to pardon is indeed an exceptional power. And it's meant, I think, to deal with inequities, at least as defined by the commander-in-chief, the president of the United States. I don't think anything in these 4 years that President Trump has done have been true to sort of the history of the use of power in the executive branch. So there's no reason to believe it's going to be any different with this, the pardoning of individuals. I do think that we almost have to kind of check ourselves, take a deep breath. This is going to be over pretty soon, to begin to figure out ways to reform and change the power of a president to issue pardons based on the performance of Trump in these closing days of his administration is probably fraught with problems. When it's all over and some time passes, maybe it's worth a look, but I don't believe over time that this has been abused, if that's what you want to call it, to the extent that we're witnessing. I don't know what kind of checks and balances you put on something like this and then make it almost irrelevant. I do think it's very important for future presidents to work very closely in coordination with the Justice Department to review these issues, so that you have professional counsel looking at each one of these cases. It's ultimately up to the president, but to do it based on who's helped in his troubled path these last 4 years and who hasn't is not what I think people intended, but it is what we're going to face, I suspect, over the next few weeks.
Al, what are your thoughts?
I agree with Craig. I think it's going to be pretty hard to limit future presidents' pardon powers. Pardons have always been controversial. Even when Craig and I were associated with presidents, we had each had a couple of controversial pardons. but nobody has really done it like Trump. It's sort of this vast pattern of finding any political crony or, any or conspirator in his misdeeds, and then and in ways that could really, and it's more of a pattern of trying to undermine our, part of his pattern trying to undermine our whole system. I'm sure that our founding father, George George Mason, didn't know Donald Trump, but he probably had nightmares of somebody like him when at the 1788 Virginia ratifying convention for the Constitution, he basically said, all presidents aren't going to be like George Washington. Maybe we ought to limit pardoning power because the president may not always be of sound character and high intelligence. And then he said, and I quote this, the president ought not to have the power of pardoning because he may frequently pardon crimes which were advised by himself. It may happen at some future day that he will establish a monarchy and destroy the republic. If he has the power of granting pardons before indictment or conviction, may he not stop inquiry and prevent detection. The case of treason ought at least to be accepted. This is a weighty objection by me. So James Madison responded to that. I mean, by saying, well, we do have a remedy, and that's impeachment. And if you look at the pardon clause in the Constitution, it says except in cases of impeachment. So when the president is impeached, he can't use his pardon. George Mason looks pretty prescient today. And as I said, I think Trump's misuse of the pardon is part of this overall process he's going through that's going to fail, but it's to try to overthrow the election or do whatever how it be as disruptive as he can. And again, today he just vetoed the defense bill. He threw a ringer into the COVID relief bill. He just wants to disrupt as he can. But Craig said something that's really important. The good news is that in 30 days, it's all going to be over. Our nightmare will end. And since I think this is going to be the last time we're going to do this for the year, I just want to wish everybody happy holidays. And thanks to everybody who has watched us. This has been great fun for us. And we hope we're going to do it again and continue it all through next year.
What a terrific way to end the program. Al Fromm, Craig Fuller, thanks again. And you too, happy holidays.